Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this conversation on use of tech, both hard and soft tech, to establish or drive systemic change, large-scale change towards climate-resilient agriculture. My name is Prashant Mehra. I am joined by my colleagues Tanmaye and Shreejit. So, to set a little bit of a context about today's discussion, I'm sure all of you are seeing how climate change is upon us. It's no longer anything about the future. And one of the things that's impacting badly is our food cycles. The rains have shifted to the right. So the monsoons are delayed and they're much more intense. And it's caused massive issues, right? So late planting, late harvesting, drying in the Feb-March season doesn't happen. That pushes the next cycle out. The temperature profiles are causing a much larger increases in pest population, in microbial diseases. So life is not very good. And there has been a lot of talk and a lot of action on what are ways in which you can adopt agriculture practices that are more resilient to the shift in climate. And more importantly, what are the kind of practices that can be deployed that over the next 20, 30, 40 years will start reversing this change. And agriculture is a big contributor. So today we're going to discuss some of that what has worked, what has scaled, what has not, and what could be done about it. So with this background, let's dive in. And I'll request Tanmay to set the ball rolling by just introducing his work and how he is looking to impact climate-related challenges, and then we'll do that with Shreejit, and then I'll after that lay out some framework which we can discuss in.
Thank you, Prashant. Very good afternoon to everyone. My name is Tanmaye Seth. I'm a director at Aquagri Processing Private Limited. And we work on cultivating and collecting marine algae on the southern coast of India and processing that to make products for agriculture, organic inputs for farming, and some products for the food processing sector. But staying with today's theme of enabling systems for climate resilient agriculture, I'll stay more on the biostimulant that we manufacture and the role it can play. So our product, which we sell as a seaweed-based biostimulant to farmers, has proven to have the potential to reduce chemical fertilizer usage by 25% and keep farming yields equal or better than following what the farmer was doing earlier. But I think now, as Prashant said, the time has come for action, and climate change is no longer a theory or something that's going to come and hit us all. It has hit us, and we need to react. And I think India needs to grow production vertically and not horizontally, because the scope is not there anymore. So in order to feed the growing population, we need to take action, which is a big challenge, because you need to transform conventional practices that have been followed by farmers. But there's a need for change now, because the patterns have changed, the soil conditions have changed. The green revolution that has given the positive and now has turned to negative, and unless we create that change, we're not going to be sustainable. So I think I'll hand it over now to Shreejit. That's a little background on what work we've been doing. I'll just add before ending that we are partnered with IFCO, and for us, one of the biggest challenges was educating and reaching the product to farmers. How does a small company do that? And for us, the big victory was that even the largest chemical fertilizer producer in the country is now conscious of that climate resilient agriculture is necessary. It gave us the platform to reach the farmers, and that has been a victory for us, but there's still a long, long way to go. Over to you, Shreejit.
Thank you, Prashant, and also Nasscom Foundation for this invitation to discuss a topic which is of prime importance today given climate change. My name is Shreejit, and I lead technology at a global non-profit called IDH. IDH is headquartered in the Netherlands, and we work across 50 countries trying to make agricultural supply chains more sustainable. And when we talk about sustainability, it's not only about environmental sustainability. It starts with economic sustainability, which is improving the incomes of smallholder farmers. We talk about social sustainability, which is hinged on parameters such as gender equality, inclusivity, and we also look at environmental sustainability. Now, one of the key things that Prashant also highlighted is that climate change is there today, and it's been there for, like, you can see the effects much more prominently now. And agriculture is in a very particular situation. Firstly, it contributes to around 1/3 of the global emissions that are causing climate change, and at the same time, it's probably the sector which is being affected the most by climate change. Secondly, if you look at the impact of climate change on agriculture, at the end of the day, it's the smallholder farmers who are being impacted the most. So in a nutshell, my role is to see how technology can help minimize this impact on smallholder farmers and actually at one point reduce the emissions related to agricultural production, and at the same time help farmers adapt to climate change. I'll take a pause here and I'll pass it back to Prashant, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, folks. So let me try to put a little bit of a framework around our discussion. Tanmaye spoke about the need to transform conventional agriculture into something sustainable. Also spoke about educating the farmers. Shreejit spoke about the role of the smallholder. And you may be well aware, about 92% of land holdings in the country are held by smallholders. So pretty much it is smallholder farmer agri. So in that, when we talk about transforming, it's essentially changing from something people have been used to do since the 60s to now. It's about 60-year history. At least 3 generations have gone through the conventional chemical way of farming. It's not an easy behavior change. So I'm putting on the table 3 things that will be needed for behavior change. The first thing is incentive. Right? So why should I do something differently? If I don't have an interest, if I don't have an incentive, I don't stand to gain something very directly from it, chances are I will not do it. Second, and in that we see that a lot of the value cap generation that is happening may or may not be captured by the smallholder. Right? So, and we'd like to talk a little bit about that. The second thing I'd like to put on the table is, okay, so I have an urge to do this because I feel it could benefit me. Do I have the knowledge? Right? So how do you tackle that issue? And what is that knowledge even mean? Are these training programs? Are these certifications? Are they learn by doing things out there? So on and so forth. So I have incentive, I have the necessary knowledge. Do I have the resources? To do any transition, you will need some resources. It could impact my current cash flow. Can I afford that? It could mean some investment. Where will that come from? Knowing very well that the agricultural income of the Indian smallholder is 1,500 rupees a month equated. It's a very little amount of money they have. So where will they get any new resources to mobilize or put pressure on this resource. So, any initiative which you will be doing as part of your work will hit these three issues. And what I'd like to know, and let's this time, I can start from you, Tanmay, that in your work, how have these issues impacted your scaling, your adoption, and how are you addressing it? And
No, I think you've laid the ground quite well, and that's exactly to change. I'll start with the first one, which is behavior. Unless there's an incentive or a clear gain, why should I change what I've been doing for so long to something new? So I think it's a huge challenge to prove to farmers. One of my first learnings and my first experience on the field was trying to reach our product to sugarcane farmers. And in that time, I spent about 2 years going sugar mill to sugar mill. And I learned that if sugarcane is planted 5 feet apart, the farmer actually gets higher yield and output compared to the current practice, which was about 1.5 to 2.5 feet of planting. So even with, which I saw about 150 demos had been laid out by this sugar mill to educate the farmers. And there was clear indication of a yield increase, yet there was no adoption. So it takes a very long time to change what a practice, especially when you're dealing with small holding farming community, and you said it's 92%, which is huge. So it's a very big challenge. Then is knowledge dissemination. I think sometimes there's a huge gap between what we think sitting in an office and what needs to be done on the ground. So the second learning was sometimes getting inputs from them and listening to them rather than using online research, maybe IIMA students, proves far more valuable in trying to bring about a change, because it's not theoretical. When you work on the ground, it's like working with another live. The ground is alive. There's microbes, there's soil types, there's weather conditions. There's so many variables that even when you prove to the farmer that you've done something right, there's so many inputs and factors that go into it. How does he say this happened because of you or because of what you told him? So it's a serious challenge, but it's a battle worth fighting, because in the end, if you can prove higher income, if you can prove improvement in the soil condition, and that's where tech can come and play a part in showing what's possible. And last was resources. I think that maybe you would be better equipped, and Shreejit will be better equipped to talk about the funding needs. Still, the rate of interests for rural lending is very high. How do we reduce that? How do we enable them and make them capable of taking the risks for a better tomorrow? That has to happen on the ground, and it's a big challenge. And I'll let Shreejit add more to these 3 points. Thanks.
Thanks, Tanmay. And I'll also add a framework to the framework that Prashant mentioned. And when we are talking about climate change and when IDH designs its programs, there are multiple lenses in which we look at climate change. One is the part of mitigation, and one is the part of resilience building. So when we talk about mitigation, it's basically around reducing emissions from agriculture, and resilience is being your ability to cope with climate changes or disasters related to climate. When we talk about the incentives part, which was the first pillar of Prashant's framework, the way we look at incentives is basically business case. Is there a business case for a climate change intervention? not only for the consumers or let's say the big buyers or the corporates, but also for the producers. Now, over time, there has been an emerging business case definitely for producers, and a lot of the climate action towards mitigation is driven by the buyers rather than the producers. And just to give you an example, today you hear a lot about net zero commitments. Buyers and corporates have said that by 2030, 2040, 2050, we'll reduce emissions or we'll become carbon neutral. In such cases, when they have committed on public platforms, they are actually willing to invest in reducing emissions in agriculture. And that becomes a business case for them and also for smallholder farmers, because they start putting money to change these practices on the ground. Also, just a small example that I would give is globally in agriculture, the highest amount of emissions is attributed to deforestation. And recently Europe has said that if we import commodities, it has to be deforestation free. So now, in case we are sourcing from areas where deforestation is happening, Europe will stop buying from those areas, which directly results in a business case and says that, okay, we have to stop deforestation, and that means we have to reduce, that will eventually lead to a reduced emissions from agriculture. So mitigation, I would say a lot of the business case or incentives are coming top down from the private sector. From adaptation or resilience building point of view, it's mostly farmer driven, because today we see a lot of uptake in terms of good agricultural practices or climate resilient agricultural practices. We see a lot of uptake in insurance, because there has been a norm that if you can insure your commodities and if you can insure your production, then at least you don't feel the brunt of climate change, or at least your risks are minimized to some level. And that's where technology is also playing a key role by making insurance payouts really fast. So I think to create incentives, there is a push from both the private sector and also an internal push from smallholder farmers, because they are feeling the effects of climate change. When it comes to knowledge, I couldn't agree more with Tanmay when he said that it's about listening to farmers, because they already have good knowledge on what could work as a climate resilient production practice versus a conventional production practices. But in our programs, we also look at technology as a means to improve this knowledge. Simple examples could include providing weather advisory on mobile phones and giving farmers an up-to-date idea on when it's going to rain. Are there specific precautionary measures that need to be taken? Mostly this knowledge is already there, but this reinforces them, and it's not about sending 100 SMSs in a day, but maybe 3 or 4 with the key messaging. Similarly, nowadays there's a lot of push towards what is called regenerative agriculture, improving soil condition, improving soil health. Because we have focused so much on the green revolution, use of fertilizers, it's becoming important to teach the younger farming generation about regenerative practices. And again, in the form of technology, it's alarming, or it's positively surprising how YouTube has become one of the source of this knowledge in terms of good production practices. So that's one of the ways in which technology is also playing a role. With respect to resources, the biggest fear for transitioning to sustainable agricultural practice is the notion that when you convert to sustainability, you are going to see production losses. So no one wants to take these losses on themselves. They continue with the conventional practices. Here we see that there's a lot of financing that comes from donors or development funders who de-risk shifts in production practices for the first 2 or 3 years and help farmers take that risk or take that jump towards sustainable production. Again, I see technology playing a key role here in creating such shifts or creating this pool of capital which enables the transition. A great example is a startup in India, not a startup, they're a big company now. It's called WRMS. They provide de-risking solutions for smallholder farmers, and one of their products is a very interesting insurance product. This product says that if farmers follow a particular suite of production practices which are deemed sustainable, Then if there's a productivity loss, that loss will be covered by the insurance. So it's basically guaranteed to the farmers that you do production practices as per sustainability. We'll monitor your practices, and in spite of that, if there is a production loss, you will get a payout for that insurance. Now that becomes like a de-risking factor. I know that if I have to change my practices, there's no risk in productivity losses, and even if there is a fall in production, I'll get some compensation for that. So again, such insurances can only be mobilized via technology because it eases monitoring. So I feel, there are different models for incentives, for knowledge generation, and also for mobilizing resources, most of which will depend on digital technologies for implementation. I'll take a pause here and pass it back to Prashant.
Thank you for this, Shreejit. See, you spoke about a very good example around underwriting the practices, right? So let's flip it a little bit. In all our work, and I forgot to introduce what we do, so I'll give you a quick thing. So we build software platforms for smallholder farmers, right from managing production, education, training, learning, knowledge management, supply chain, market linkage, the works, access to finance, so on. And in all our work, we found that whichever stakeholder you're talking to, there is a lot of focus on outputs and outcomes, and very little focus on process. An example of that I'd like to share, in fact, with everyone. So imagine a crop. So let's say I'm growing potatoes, and I decide to adopt regenerative agriculture practices. I reduce my pest output, and I start my journey towards, say, an organic potato production. Firstly, it's a 3-year journey for me to get a certification. It's fraught with risk, many things outside my control, what my neighbor is doing, so on and so forth. But more importantly, assuming I do a ton of good practices, right? I do mulching, I do biopesticides, I improve the microbial count, the water retention capability of the soil through all those practices. And then before the last harvest, some pest attack comes and I have to use a pesticide. So I will get a potato which is not an organic potato, and the market will not give me a price premium for it. But the last 3 years of work I have done on the soil, on usage of less water or whatever else, and improving the soil pH balance, and all of that cannot be negated because of one pesticide spray. It has actually done good. It's like you did good food and exercise for 3 years, and on the last day of the exam you binged on burgers and fries. That will not take away your 3 years of benefit you've actually accrued in your body. But the way the market is today set up, that nobody is rewarding you for that. It's that final exam that counts. So if the pesticide test for the potato fails, well, you don't get any price premium because there's no reward for following good practices. What do you think can be done in that space? Because we all learn that behavior change is actually about the practices. It's not really about the output or the end goal. It is the process. So what do you think is how would you approach this problem?
No, I think it's a very valid point, and it's like we're told always in life, it's always the journey and not the destination. That's an example of that. So I think how it will be rewarded, I don't have an answer, but it should be rewarded. I am completely in agreement of that. I think we saw an example in agriculture of when you do things drastically, like what we did in Sri Lanka. They banned chemical fertilizer. End result, they lost 3 crop cycles. Farmers' income went down. They started importing food. So I think we have to, like you said, award good farming practices, and it has to be a balance between conventional farming and regenerative, or what we call organic farming. I also think we need to look at I have not looked at it of late, but earlier the national program for organic production was, if I may say, retarded. If it means if I wash my window with Colin, I can't be an organic farm. So it has to be more, we just pick up the law from Europe and superimpose it onto India. We need to think, create policies and practices which are awarded in a way where we are meeting majority of the goal. It doesn't have to be that one spray does not negate the 35 months of effort the farmer puts in. I mean, another example was, I was in Assam in an organic tea estate with a very smallholder farmer who had 2 bighas of tea farming. And I was speaking to that lady farmer, and I said, if there's an attack or a fungal attack, what do you do? And she was simple enough to tell me, we'll put pesticide at night. So let's be real too. She's feeding a family from that 2 bigha. I would do the same. If my family's bread is dependent and my crops are dying, and for the weight of organic, I'm not going to not save my plot. So we have to create and award good farming practices, and it has to be gradual. We can't expect to ace the exam on day one. It has to be a gradual process, and as long as we are moving towards it, a premium needs to start coming in for an award in the change in practice. Like you said when you started, behavioral change needs incentive, and without that it's very difficult to change. And I'll let Shreejit add more to it.
Thanks, Tanmay. I think it's one of the most complicated processes because the question is who is going to pay for these changes in practices, because the private sector is looking for the output and not the 3 years of effort that goes into it. So I think, like Tanmay said, it has to be a very gradual process. Like in our regenerative agriculture programs, we don't say that you need to cut chemical use from day one. It's about a gradual shift that also improves the resilience of your plants or crop to deal with a sudden reduction in chemicals, and it also ensures that productivity is maintained to some level. Besides that, I think in agriculture, over the last 3 years at least, there has been some big, I would say, dynamism in carbon markets. So instead of, like, if you are trying to make some kind of a regenerative cotton, the final output is definitely going to get your premium. But in the whole 3-year process, in case you are able to restore some of the soil carbon, it's highly likely that you'll be able to monetize that in the form of carbon credits. But it's still a sector where we are not sure of the question as to, are the current carbon prices enough to incentivize a shift in sustainable practices? So I think over time, as carbon prices increase, there is more, I would say, transparency in the sector. There is more understanding of the sector that could become one of the ways to monetize a change in processes rather than only outputs. Finally, another point that I wanted to say is that while we are trying to shift processes or make farmers move to more sustainable practices, we ourselves do not have, we as in the entire ecosystem, does not have that information as to what sustainable practice is going to lead to what outcome. In every context, it's very different. It's like a micro, like you have to plan at a micro level. So one of the things that the ecosystem also needs to do is invest in data and share that data so that we know what works well and in what context, and everyone does not have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of the costs in digital technology goes on data collection. It's sometimes up to 60 to 70% of the total service cost. And imagine if you can reduce that, can that 60 to 70% be used to incentivize and pay farmers for changes in processes? So that's one of the ways that we can think about paying for processes rather than the outputs. Prashant and Tanmay, if you have anything to add, or back to you.
No, I think we are good.
Thank you so much for the wonderful discussion.